Hien Wu pressed his 6 fingers against the glowing screen and sighed. The archive station floated quietly in space, its metal walls humming with the sound of thousands of computers working day and night. Outside, the thick windows, too bright. Suns painted everything in gold and orange light. He had been working here for 3 years now, and still the beauty of space amazed him. But today, he was not looking at the stars. Today, he was looking at something that made no sense at all. The file on his screen showed a simple title, "What Not to Do Around Humans." Below that title was nothing, just empty space. A blank page that went on and on with no words, no pictures, no warnings, nothing at all. Hien Wu scratched his blue-scaled head with one of his 4 arms. Every other species in the galaxy had pages and pages of information. The Kaleri had 23 pages about their love of singing and how visitors should never interrupt their daily songs. The Vorthok had 15 pages warning everyone about their explosive temper and sharp claws. Even a peaceful Mentari had 7 pages explaining their need for absolute silence during their meditation hours. But humans had nothing, just that strange title and emptiness. He had discovered this while doing his daily work of organizing the behavioral guides. New species joined the Galactic Council every year, and someone had to make sure all the important information was properly filed. It was boring work, but Hien Wu liked boring work. Boring work meant no surprises, no problems, no angry supervisors. This blank page was definitely a surprise. Hien Wu looked around the archive hall. Hundreds of other workers sat at their desks. They had different alien forms bent over glowing screens. Some had tentacles instead of arms. Others had fur or scales or skin that changed colors. The archive station employed beings from 47 different worlds, all working together to keep the galaxy's knowledge safe and organized. He decided to ask his supervisor about the strange blank page. Bora sat behind a desk twice as large as Hien Wu's. She was older than most archivists, with deep wrinkles around her large yellow eyes and gray patches in her blue scales. She had worked at the archive station for over 50 years and knew more about galactic records than anyone else. Supervisor Bora, Hien Wu said, approaching her desk carefully. "I found something odd in the behavioral files." Bora looked up from her work. "Odd how?" "The Human Behavioral Guide. It's completely empty. It's just a title and nothing else. Is this a mistake? Should I contact the Cultural Analysis Department to fill it in?" Biora's eyes went wide. She quickly saved her work and gestured for Hien Wu to sit down. "You found the human page," she said quietly. "Yes, ma'am. It seems like someone forgot to write the actual guide." Biora was quiet for a long moment. She looked out the window at the spinning stars, then back at Hien Wu. "That page is not a mistake, Archivist 3rd Class. That page is exactly the way it is supposed to be." Hien Wu felt confused. "I don't understand, Supervisor. Every species has behavioral guidelines. How can visitors know what to do around humans if there are no instructions?" "That is a very good question," Biora said. "And it is exactly the right question to ask. Come with me." Biora stood up and walked toward the back of the archive hall. Hien Wu followed her through several corridors he had never seen before. The walls here were older, made of different metal, and covered with small lights that blinked in complex patterns. They stopped in front of a heavy door, marked Historical Records, Restricted Access. Biora placed her hand on a scanner, and the door slid open with a deep, rumbling sound. Inside was a small room filled with old storage devices and ancient computer terminals. The air smelled dusty and forgotten. Biora walked to one of the terminals and began typing with practiced speed. "The blank page exists because of what we call the Great Incident of 2387, she said as she worked. "The year when the Galactic Council decided that humans needed behavioral guidelines just like every other species. What happened?" 3 different committees tried to create those guidelines. 3 times they failed, not because they were bad at their jobs, but because humans are. Buora paused, searching for the right words. Different. The terminal screen lit up with old files and reports. Haiyan Wu could see hundreds of documents with titles like Committee Report 2387A, Incident Analysis 2388C, and Emergency Council Meeting Minutes 2389. Different how? Haiyan Wu asked. Buora smiled, but it was not a happy smile. Every species in the galaxy follows patterns. The Kalari always sing at sunrise. Forthok always fight when they feel threatened. Zamintari always meditate for exactly 3 hours. Each day we can predict what they will do because they do the same things over and over. She pointed at the screen. Humans do not follow patterns. They change their behavior based on situations we cannot predict. They make decisions that seem impossible. They solve problems in ways that should not work, but somehow do work. Haiyan Wu looked at the files on the screen. There were so many of them. What kind of problems? All kinds. The first committee spent 2 years studying humans and wrote a guide that was 847 pages long. They covered everything they could think of. Then they showed it to a human diplomat for approval. What did the human say? She read the entire guide in front of the Galactic Council. Then she did everything the guide said humans should never do, and she succeeded at all of it. She proved that every single rule in the guide was wrong. Haiyan Wu felt his head spinning. How is that possible? That is what the second committee tried to find out. They spent 5 years living with humans, learning their languages and customs. They thought they understood human culture and psychology. They wrote a beautiful guide based on human values and motivations. Buora scrolled through more files. Then an 8-year-old human child destroyed their entire theory by asking questions they could not answer. Simple questions. Questions like, why and how do you know? And what if you're wrong? A child defeated a team of experts. The third committee tried a different approach. They collected thousands of incident reports about humans, real events that actually happened. They created simple, practical warnings based on facts. Buora stopped scrolling and looked at Haiyan Wu. A human engineer proved that their warnings could be used as instructions for achieving impossible things. He turned their list of what not to do into a manual for how to do amazing things. Haiyan Wu stared at the screen, trying to understand. So the page is blank because no one can write guidelines for humans. The page is blank because the blank page is the guideline, Buora said. It tells other species the most important thing they need to know about humans. Expect them to do the unexpected. She closed the files and turned off the terminal. Your job, Archivist 3rd Class Haiyan Wu, is to interview the survivors of those committees. Learn their stories. Understand why that page must remain empty. Hey, this is not busy work or a punishment. This is one of the most important research assignments in the archive. As they walked back through the corridors, Haiyan Wu felt excited for the first time in months. Sporing job had suddenly become the most interesting mystery in the galaxy. Where do I start? He asked. Start with the files I showed you. Read every report, every interview, every incident summary. Then find the beings who were there when it happened. Some still work here at the archive. Others have retired to distant worlds. But they all remember the great incident of 2387. Back at his desk, Haiyan Wu looked at his screen with new eyes. The blank page was no longer empty. It was full of possibilities, full of questions. It's full of the most important lesson in the galaxy. Some truths are too big for words. Haiyan Wu spent 3 days reading files before he found his first interview subject. Her name was Sa Young, and she still worked at the archive station in the Deep Space Communications Department. She was a Zentarian like him, but much older, with silver patches covering most of her blue scales. When Hyen Wu contacted her about an interview, So Young was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I wondered when someone would finally ask about that time." "Yes, young archivist, I will tell you about the first committee. But you must promise me something." "What is that?" "Promise me you will not try to write guidelines for humans after you hear my story." Hyen Wu promised, though he did not understand why she looked so worried when she said it. They met in the station's main cafeteria during the quiet hours between shifts. So Young ordered warm bitterroot tea and stared into the cup for a long time before she began speaking. "I was much younger then," she said, "only 35 years old, and so proud to be chosen for the committee. We thought we were the smartest beings in the galaxy. We thought we could solve any problem with logic and careful observation." She took a sip of her tea. The committee leader was Kun Ho, a Zentarian logic specialist from the University of Taylor Prime. He had written 12 books about behavioral patterns in intelligent species. The committee also included me as diplomatic specialist, K, plus experts in psychology, sociology, and interspecies communication. "What was your plan?" Hyen Wu asked. "Simple. We would study humans the same way we've studied every other species. Watch them, record their behaviors, find the patterns, write the rules." Kun Ho estimated it would take 6 months. So Young laughed, but it was not a happy sound. He spent 2 full years on the project. 2 years of watching, recording, analyzing, and trying to make sense of what we saw. She pulled out an old data pad and showed Hyen Wu some faded images. We visited 17 human colonies and space stations. We observed over 10,000 individual humans in their daily lives. We recorded everything they did, everything they said, every decision they made. The images showed humans doing ordinary things, working in gardens, building machines, teaching children, preparing food. They looked normal enough to Hyun-Wu, double quotes. "What did you discover?" he asked. "That humans do not make sense," So Young said firmly. "Every other species we studied had clear behavioral rules. Kaleri always prioritized group harmony over individual desires. Warthog always respond to threats with aggression. Mentari always seek the most efficient solution to problems." She scrolled through more images, but humans would sometimes put the group first and sometimes put themselves first. Sometimes they would fight when threatened, and sometimes they would try to make friends with their enemies. Sometimes they would choose efficient solutions, and sometimes they would choose solutions that took much longer but made them feel better. Hyen Wu frowned. "That does sound confusing." It was worse than confusing. Seemed random. But Kun Ho insisted there had to be patterns we were missing. So we studied harder. We learned human languages. We read their history books. We interviewed thousands of humans about why they made the decisions they made. So Young finished her tea and ordered another cup. Slowly, we began to see deeper patterns. Humans had strong emotions that influenced their logic. They cared deeply about things that seemed unimportant to other species. They would take huge risks to help strangers or to prove points that only mattered to them. It helped you understand them. We thought it did. After 2 years, we had identified 47 major behavioral patterns and over 300 minor ones. We understood that humans were driven by complex mixtures of logic, emotion, curiosity, stubbornness, and something they called hope. She showed Hyen Wu a thick file on her data pad. Our final report was 847 pages long. We covered everything we could think of: how to approach humans safely, what topics to avoid in conversation, how to recognize when they were happy or angry or planning something dangerous. Oh, it sounds very thorough. We thought so too. We were so proud of our work. The report included detailed warnings about human unpredictability. We explained that humans often did things that seemed illogical, but made perfect sense when you understood their emotional and cultural motivations. So Young's expression grew dark. We also included practical warnings based on things we had observed. Never challenge humans to contested endurance because they will push themselves to dangerous limits just to prove they can. Never underestimate their problem-solving abilities, especially when they start talking about using tools in ways the tools were not designed for. Never assume they will give up on a goal just because it seems impossible. Those sound like good warnings. They were excellent warnings. Every single one was based on careful observation and solid evidence. We documented everything. We had video recordings, interview transcripts, psychological analysis. Our work was scientific and thorough. So Young stared out the cafeteria window at the stars. Then came the day when we presented our guide to the Galactic Council for approval. Standard procedure required us to show it to human representatives first to make sure we had not made any cultural mistakes. What happened? The human ambassador was a woman named Minji. She was small and quiet, with graying hair and kind eyes. She looked like a harmless grandmother. She read our entire report while the Galactic Council waited. Sa Young shook her head slowly. When she finished reading, Minji stood up and thanked us for our hard work. She said our research was very impressive and our observations were mostly accurate. Then she said she wanted to demonstrate something. Hyan Wu leaned forward. What did she demonstrate? Everything we said humans should never do. One by one, she went through our most important warnings and broke every single rule. Right there in front of the entire Galactic Council. How? She started with our warning about endurance contests. We had written that humans would push themselves to dangerous limits if challenged. Kay challenged herself to hold her breath while reciting the names of all council members in alphabetical order. It should have been impossible, but she did it perfectly. So Young counted on her fingers. Then she took apart her communication device with eating utensils and rebuilt it into a musical instrument that played the council anthem. She solved a mathematical puzzle that had stumped Zentarian scholars for decades by using an approach that made no logical sense, but somehow worked. She turned a formal diplomatic dinner into an impromptu cooking lesson that had council members from 12 different species working together like old friends. She did all of that in one day, in 3 hours. Okay. Every time she broke one of our rules, she explained why our rule was incomplete. She showed us that our warnings were not wrong, but they were not complete either. Humans could do all the things we warned about, but they could also do the exact opposite when they chose to. So Young stood up and gathered her things. The worst part was that Minji was not trying to embarrass us. She was genuinely trying to help us understand something important about her species. She was kind and patient and encouraging. What did you learn? That humans are not unpredictable because they are chaotic. They are unpredictable because they have more choices than other species. They can choose to be logical or emotional, careful or reckless, selfish or generous. They can change their fundamental approach to life based on what they think the situation needs. Sa Young looked at Hyan Wu seriously. Our committee disbanded after that presentation. We realized that any rule we made about humans would be true sometimes and false other times. We could not create guidelines because humans do not stay inside guidelines. As she walked away, So Young called back over her shoulder. Remember your promise, young archivist. Do not try to write rules for humans. The blank page exists for good reasons. Hyun Woo sat alone in the cafeteria, staring at his notes. The first committee had been smart, careful, and thorough. They had done everything right, but doing everything right was not enough when dealing with humans. He was beginning to understand why the page had to stay blank. Finding the second committee member took Hyun Woo much longer. Kay, the being he needed to interview, had retired from the archive station 15 years ago and moved to a quiet farming world called Gentle Valley. It took 3 weeks of paperwork and travel permits before Hyen-woo could visit him. J-Min lived in a small house, surrounded by purple flowers and singing trees. He was not a Zentarian like Hyen-woo, but a Villani with soft gray fur and large, thoughtful eyes. When Hyen-woo arrived, Jamin was sitting on his porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I have been expecting someone like you for years," Jamin said before Hyen-woo could introduce himself. "Please, sit down. Would you like some fruit juice? The local berries are very sweet this time of year." They sat in comfortable wooden chairs while small alien birds chirped in the trees around them. Jamin poured 2 glasses of purple juice that tasted like sunshine and laughter. "You want to know about the second committee?" Jamin said. "About our attempt to understand human culture instead of just human behavior?" "Yes, sir." I interviewed Saw Young from the first committee. She told me how the logical approach failed. Jamin nodded slowly. "Saw Young is a good friend. We worked together briefly when the council was deciding whether to try again. She warned us that studying human actions was not enough. She said we needed to understand human hearts." "Is that what your committee tried to do?" "Exactly. The second committee was formed 3 years after the first one disbanded. I was chosen to lead it because of my background in cultural anthropology. My specialty was understanding how different species create meaning in their lives." Jamin took a sip of his juice and smiled at the memory. "My team included Eugen, a brilliant cultural specialist from the northern universities. We also had experts in linguistics, philosophy, and comparative religion. We believed the first committee failed because they watched humans from the outside. We decided to understand humans from the inside." "What did that mean?" "We moved to human worlds, not as observers, but as neighbors. We learned human languages until we could think in human words. We studied human art, music, literature, and history. We participated in human festivals and ceremonies, made human friends." Jamin stood up and walked to a shelf inside his house. He returned with a photo album filled with pictures of himself and other aliens living among humans. In the images, he looked much younger, his gray fur still dark and thick. "This is me learning to cook human food with a family on Terra Colony 7, he said, pointing to a picture of himself wearing a white apron and looking confused while holding a wooden spoon. "And this is Eugen teaching human children how to sing traditional Kaleri songs." Hyen-woo looked through the album. The pictures showed committee members laughing with humans, working alongside them, celebrating holidays together. Everyone looked happy and relaxed. "It looks like you enjoyed the experience. We loved it. Living with humans was wonderful." Tay welcomed us into their communities like we were family. They shared their stories, their dreams, their fears. They taught us their customs and asked us to teach them ours. Jamin turned the page to show more pictures. "After 5 years of this, we thought we truly understood human culture. We identified the core values that drove human behavior: curiosity, loyalty, hope, and what they call the stubborn refusal to accept that anything is impossible." That sounds much deeper than the first committee's approach. It was. We did not just observe human actions. We understood human motivations. We knew why humans would risk their lives to save strangers. We understood why they would spend decades working on projects that might never succeed. We knew why they cried at sad stories and laughed at things that other species found confusing. Jamin closed the photo album and held it gently in his lap. Our final report was very different from the first committee's guide. Instead of rules and warnings, we wrote about human values and cultural patterns. We explained how human society worked, how humans made decisions, how they formed relationships and communities. It sounds beautiful. It was, our report read, like poetry. We wrote about the human spirit, about their endless capacity for growth and change. We explained that humans were not unpredictable, rather, that they made choices based on values that other species did not always understand. Jamin's expression grew sad. We were so proud of our work. We thought we had solved the mystery that defeated the first committee. We scheduled a presentation to the Galactic Council, confident that our cultural approach had succeeded, where pure logic had failed. What went wrong? A little human girl named HFY. Jamin laughed, but his eyes looked tired. She was 8 years old, the daughter of a human diplomatic aide. She was supposed to wait quietly in the gallery while the adults talked about serious things. What did she do? She listened. During our presentation, we explained our theory about human behavior being based on core cultural values. We said that humans never act without logical motivation, even when that motivation is emotional rather than rational. We were very proud of this insight. Jamin stood up and walked to the edge of his porch, looking out at the peaceful landscape. When we finished our presentation, little HFY raised her hand. The council speaker was amused and decided to let her ask a question. She stood up in the gallery and asked one simple word. Why? Why? What? Just why? Why do humans never act without logical motivation? So, we explained our theory about human values and cultural programming. Then she asked why again. Why do humans have those particular values? So we explained human evolution and history. Jamin shook his head. Then she asked why humans evolved that way. So we talked about environmental pressures and survival advantages. Then she asked why those particular environments created those particular pressures. Every time we answered her question, she asked why again. HFY felt a chill run down his spine. How long did this continue? For 2 hours. That little girl kept asking why, and we kept trying to answer her, but every answer led to another question. Why did the universe develop in a way that created the conditions for human evolution? Why did the laws of physics work the way they did? Why did existence exist at all? What happened? We realized that our entire theory was built on assumptions we could not prove. We claimed that humans always had logical motivations, but we could not explain why logic itself mattered. So we said humans followed cultural patterns, but we could not say why those patterns developed instead of different ones. Jamin returned to his chair and sat down heavily. The worst part was that HFY was not trying to embarrass us. She was genuinely curious. She wanted to understand the universe the same way we wanted to understand humans. Her questions came from the same human curiosity that we had spent 5 years studying. So your committee disbanded too. So we had to. Little HFY had shown us that our beautiful theory about human culture was just another set of rules, no matter how poetic we made them sound. And humans, even 8-year-old humans, could find the edges of any rule system just by asking questions that the rules could not answer. The sun had set completely now, and the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. Jamin lit a small lamp that cast warm light across the porch. I learned something important from that experience, he said quietly. Humans do not just think outside the box. They question whether the box needs to exist at all. They ask why in ways that challenge the fundamental assumptions that other species take for granted. Is that why you were tired here? I needed time to think, to understand what HFY had taught me. I spent years gardening and reading and trying to make sense of it all. Jamin smiled and touched one of the purple flowers growing near his porch. These flowers do not ask why they bloom. They just bloom because that is what flowers do. But humans would ask why blooming matters, why beauty exists, why we find meaning in things that serve no practical purpose. And did you find any answers? Found peace. I learned that some questions are more important than their answers. The human ability to ask why about everything is not a problem to be solved. It is a gift to be appreciated. As HFY prepared to leave the next morning, Jamin walked him to the transport station. "Tell me, young archivist," he said, after hearing about 2 failed committees, "are you still planning to research the third one?" "Yes, sir. I want to understand the complete story." Jamin nodded approvingly. "Good. But remember what I learned from Little Haywan. The most important questions are often the simplest ones. Why do we need to understand humans at all? Why is it not enough to simply appreciate them for who they are?" During the long journey back to the archive station, Hien Wu thought about those questions. He was beginning to see that the blank page was not just about the failure to categorize humans. It was about the wisdom of knowing when to stop trying to have all the answers. Back at the archive station, Hien Wu discovered that his next interview subject worked just 3 floors below him. Kang Wu was the current head of safety documentation, a serious job that involved recording every accident, incident, and unexpected event that happened anywhere in Galactic Council space. When Hien Wu requested an interview, Dong Wu invited him to his office immediately. The room was filled with filing cabinets, computer screens, and stacks of incident reports reaching almost to the ceiling. Everything was organized with perfect precision. "I have been waiting 20 years for someone to ask me about the third committee," Dong Wu said, gesturing for Hien Wu to sit in a chair across from his desk. "I kept all the files, just in case." Dong Wu was a tall, thin being with 4 arms and smooth purple skin. His large black eyes moved constantly, scanning the room as if looking for potential safety hazards. He spoke in quick, precise sentences that reminded Hien Wu of a computer reading data. "Before we begin," Dong Wu said, "I need to warn you about something. The third committee's story is different from the first 2. We did not fail because our approach was wrong. We failed because our approach was to right." "I don't understand." "You will." Dong Wu pulled out a thick folder marked with red warning labels. The third committee was formed 7 years after the second one disbanded. By then, the Galactic Council was getting impatient. They had spent over a decade trying to create human behavioral guidelines, and they still had nothing to show for it. He opened the folder and showed Hien Wu pages covered with numbers, charts, and official stamps. The council decided that the first 2 committees had failed because they were too theoretical. The first committee tried to understand human logic. The second committee tried to understand human culture. Both approaches were too complicated. So, what did the third committee try? Facts. Simple, practical facts. No theory, no analysis, no interpretation. Just cold, hard data about what actually happened when other species interacted with humans. Dong Wu pulled out another chair and sat next to Hien Wu instead of behind his desk. "I was chosen to lead the committee because of my experience with incident reports. My partner was Yoonji, a safety specialist from the Emergency Response Division. Our job was simple: collect every documented case of something unexpected happening involving humans, then write practical warnings based on those real events." That sounds like a sensible approach. It was sensible. It was also exhausting. Dong Wu showed Hien Wu a computer screen filled with file names. He spent 4 years collecting incident reports from across the galaxy. Trade disputes, diplomatic meetings, scientific collaborations, cultural exchanges, emergency rescues. Anytime humans were involved and something unexpected happened, we recorded it. Hien Wu looked at the screen. There were thousands of files. "How many incidents did you find?" 10,632 documented cases, each one carefully verified and cross-referenced. Dong Wu's voice carried a mix of pride and exhaustion. "We read every single report, interviewed witnesses when possible, and analyzed the data for patterns." "What kind of incidents?" Dong Wu scrolled through the files and clicked on one at random. "Here is Incident Report 4847, a diplomatic dinner between humans and the Kaleri High Council." The dinner was supposed to be a formal ceremony to sign a trade agreement. He read from the screen. The human delegation arrived on time and properly dressed. Everything proceeded normally until the Kalari began their traditional premio singing ceremony. According to witnesses, the humans listened politely for approximately 10 minutes, then began asking questions about the songs. Okay, that seems reasonable. The questions led to a discussion about Kalari musical theory. The discussion led to the humans teaching the Kalari some human songs. The singing session lasted 4 hours. By the end of the evening, both delegations were composing new songs together, and they had accidentally created 3 new trade agreements that were much better than the original one. Dongwu clicked on another file. Incident report 7291. Human engineers were asked to examine a Vorthok mining machine that had broken down. The machine was 500 years old and used technology that no one understood anymore. The Vorthok expected the humans to declare it unrepairable. What did the humans do? They fixed it by hitting it with a hammer. Not just any hammer. They spent 6 hours studying the machine, calculating stress points and resonance frequencies. Then they hit it in exactly the right place with exactly the right force. The machine started working better than it had in decades. Hai and Wu stared at the screen. They solved advanced engineering problems with a hammer. That is just the beginning. Incident report 9156. Humans taught an entire species of warrior aliens how to play poker, which fundamentally changed their understanding of honor and strategy. Incident report 11203. A human child accidentally solved a mathematical puzzle that had stumped the best scholars in the galaxy by approaching it like a game instead of a serious problem. Dongwu leaned back in his chair. After 4 years of collecting these stories, we had identified the real pattern in human behavior. Humans consistently achieved impossible results by ignoring the rules that other species considered unbreakable. So, you wrote warnings based on these incidents. We tried to. Our approach seemed foolproof. Instead of trying to understand why humans did unexpected things, we would simply warn other species about what unexpected things humans had actually done before. Dongwu pulled out a printed document that was much thinner than the reports from the first 2 committees. Our final guide was only 12 pages long. Each page contained simple, practical warnings based on documented incidents. Do not assume humans will follow standard procedures. Do not assume human solutions will look like solutions other species would choose. Do not assume humans will give up when facing impossible problems. 12 pages sounds much more practical than 800 pages. That is what we thought. We were proud of our efficient, fact-based approach. We scheduled our presentation to the Galactic Council with complete confidence. No theory to debate, no cultural assumptions to challenge. Just simple warnings based on things that had actually happened. Dongwu's expression grew dark. The presentation was attended by a human engineer named Tae Han. He was there as a technical consultant to help the council understand some of the engineering incidents in our report. What went wrong? Tae Han listened to our entire presentation without interrupting. When we finished, he thanked us for our thorough research. Then he pointed out something we had not considered. Dongwu stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the stars. He said our incident reports were not warnings, but they were instructions. Every unexpected thing we had documented was an example of humans finding creative solutions to difficult problems. The species could learn from these examples. That sounds like a good thing. Would have been, except for what happened next. Tae Han asked if he could demonstrate his point using our own data. The council agreed, thinking it would be educational. Dongwu returned to his desk and pulled out another file. Using our incident reports as a guide, Tae Han proceeded to solve 6 different problems that the Galactic Council had been struggling with for years. He used the poker incident to redesign the council's conflict resolution procedures. He used the hammer incident to fix a malfunctioning communication array that connected 50 different star systems. He used the dinner incident to improve diplomatic protocols. He solved real problems using your warnings as instructions. All of them in one afternoon, right there in the council chambers. Dongwu sat down heavily. He proved that our practical warnings were actually a manual for achieving the impossible. He turned our list of what not to expect from humans into a handbook for how to think like humans. Haiyan Wu felt his head spinning. So your committee failed because you succeeded too well. Exactly. We had documented human problem solving so thoroughly that we accidentally created the most effective guide to creative thinking ever written. But it was not a guide for how to interact with humans. It was a guide for how to become more like humans. Dongwu closed all the files and looked at Haiyan Wu seriously. The third committee disbanded because we realized something important. You cannot create rules for dealing with humans because humans do not follow rules. They create new rules whenever the old rules stop working. Is that why the page stays blank? The page stays blank because humans are not a problem to be solved. They are a question that keeps asking itself new questions. Every time we think we understand them, they show us something we had never imagined was possible. As Haiyan Wu prepared to leave, Dongwu gave him a final piece of advice. You have one more interview to conduct, young archivist. Speak with Archive Master Jin Wu. He was there when the council made the final decision about the blank page. He will tell you why the page is not empty at all, but rather the most complete guide to humans ever written. Walking back to his own office, Haiyan Wu carried the weight of all the stories he had heard. 3 committees, 3 different approaches, 3 spectacular failures that were also successes in ways no one had expected. He was beginning to understand that the blank page was not a failure to document human behavior. Archive Master Jin Wu was the oldest being on the entire station. He had worked at the Galactic archives for over 90 years. And his office was located at the very top of the station, in a room with windows that looked out in every direction. When Haiyan Wu requested an interview, Jin Wu invited him to come during the morning shift when the twin suns would be rising together. The office was unlike any room Wu had ever seen. Instead of filing cabinets and computer screens, it contained comfortable chairs, living plants, and walls covered with handwritten notes in dozens of different alien languages. Books from 100 different worlds sat on wooden shelves that reached from floor to ceiling. Jin Wu himself was small and bent with age. His scales had faded from blue to pale silver, and he moved slowly with the help of a walking stick carved from some kind of glowing wood. But his eyes were bright and alert, and when he smiled, Haiyan Wu felt immediately welcome. So you are the young archivist who's been asking questions about the human page, Jin Wu said, settling into a chair near the large window. I have been following your research with great interest. Biora tells me you have interviewed the survivors from all 3 committees. Yes, Archive Master. I have learned their stories, but I still do not fully understand why the page must remain blank. Jin Wu poured 2 cups of steaming liquid from a pot that seemed to heat itself. The drink smelled like flowers and tasted like memories of home. Tell me what you have learned so far. Haiyan Wu organized his thoughts carefully. The first committee failed because humans could break any logical rule by choosing to act differently. The second committee failed because humans asked questions that challenged the basic assumptions other species use to understand reality. The third committee failed because humans turned warnings into instructions for creative problem solving. Excellent. Summary. And what conclusion have you drawn from these 3 failures? That humans cannot be categorized or predicted using normal methods. They change their behavior based on what they think each situation needs, and they refuse to accept that. Anything is truly impossible. Jin Wu nodded approvingly. You have understood the surface truth. Now, let me tell you the deeper truth. The reason why I was present when the Galactic Council made the final decision about the blank page. The old archive master stood up slowly and walked to one of his bookshelves. He pulled out a thick volume bound in unfamiliar material and returned to his chair. This book contains the complete records of the council debates that followed the failure of the Third Committee. 27 different species participated in those discussions over the course of 6 months. The question they were trying to answer was simple. What should we do about the humans? What were the options? Some council members wanted to ban humans from joining the Galactic Council entirely. They argued that any species that could not be understood or predicted was too dangerous to include in civilized society. Jinwoo turned the pages carefully. Other members wanted to classify humans as a restricted species that could only interact with other species under careful supervision. Heinwu felt shocked. They wanted to treat humans like dangerous criminals. They were afraid. 3 committees of the galaxy's best minds had failed to understand humans. Some council members decided this meant humans were fundamentally incompatible with galactic civilization. Jinwoo showed Heinwu pages covered with official votes and debate transcripts. The discussions continued for months. Representatives from 47 different species argued about what humans meant for the future of the galaxy. Then, something unexpected happened. What? Human delegation requested permission to address the council. They had heard about the debates and wanted to speak for themselves. The council agreed, thinking it might help them make a final decision. Jinwoo smiled at the memory. The human delegation consisted of 3 people, an elderly philosopher named Su-Jin, a young engineer named Jun-Ho, and a middle-aged teacher named Yan-Su. They were not diplomats or politicians. They were just ordinary humans who wanted to help. What did they say? Jin spoke first. She thanked the council for their efforts to understand humanity, and she apologized for the confusion the 3 committees had experienced. Then she said something that changed everything. Jinwoo found the page he was looking for and read aloud. She said, "We know we are difficult to understand because we do not understand ourselves completely either. We change and grow and learn new things about who we are every day. If you made rules about us today, those rules would be different tomorrow because we would be different tomorrow." She admitted that humans are unpredictable. More than that, she explained that human unpredictability is not a flaw to be corrected, but a feature to be celebrated. Humans are not chaos. They are growth. They are change. The cues. Jinwoo continued reading. Then the engineer Jun-Ho explained why the 3 committees had failed. He said that each committee had tried to put humans into boxes that already existed. The logical box, the cultural box, the practical box. But humans do not fit into existing boxes because they create new boxes whenever they need them. And the teacher. Yansu spoke last. She said that humans did not want to be understood in the way other species were understood. They wanted to be experienced. They wanted to be friends with other species, to learn from them and teach them in return. They wanted to grow together and discover new possibilities that none of them could find alone. Jinwoo closed the book and looked out at the twin suns, which were now fully risen and filling the office with warm golden light. After the human delegation finished speaking, the council took a vote. By a margin of 38-9, they decided to do something that had never been done before in galactic history. What did they decide? They decided to leave the page blank on purpose, not because they had failed to understand humans, but because they had succeeded in understanding something more important, that some aspects of existence should not be contained by rules or explanations. Jinwoo stood up and walked to his window, gesturing for Hyenwoo to join him. Below them, the archive station bustled with activity as beings from dozens of different worlds worked together to preserve and organize the galaxy's knowledge. The blank page serves four purposes, Jinwoo said. First, it warns other species that humans cannot be predicted using normal methods. Second, it reminds the Galactic Council that bureaucracy has limits. Third, it acknowledges that growth and change are more valuable than stability and predictability. What is the fourth purpose? Celebrates mystery. It says that the galaxy is large enough and wonderful enough to contain things that do not need to be fully explained to be appreciated. They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the stars and planets slowly turn in the U.S. vast darkness of space. Finally, Jinwoo spoke again. Your research is nearly complete, young archivist. You have one final task. What is that? Write your own report about why the page must remain blank. Add your findings to the archive. Help future archivists understand what you have learned. Over the next month, Hyen-Woo worked on his report. He wrote about the three committees and their spectacular failures that were also successes. He explained how humans could not be contained by rules because they created new rules whenever the old ones stopped working. He described the wisdom of leaving some questions unanswered. When his report was finished, Hyen-Woo submitted it to the archive with a recommendation that it be filed under Central Knowledge for Understanding the Nature of Understanding Itself. 6 months later, a new human diplomatic team visited the archive station. Their leader was a young woman named Sujin, who was related to the philosopher who had spoken to the council years before. She saw the blank page and the behavioral guidelines. She smiled and left a comment in the visitor log. The comment was simple. Thank you for leaving room for us to become who we have not yet imagined we could be. The archivists spent weeks debating what this comment meant. Some thought it was a philosophical statement about human potential. Others believed it was a practical observation about the nature of growth and change. A few suggested it might be both or neither. Hyen-Woo, now promoted to senior archivist for his excellent research, read the comment and understood something important. The human visitor was not trying to explain anything, okay? She was demonstrating the exact reason why the page had to stay blank. Humans would always be one step ahead of any attempt to define them, not because they were trying to be difficult, but because they were always in the process of becoming something new. The blank page was not empty. It was full of infinite possibility, and that, Hyen-Woo realized, was the most accurate guide to humanity that could ever be written.